Welcome back, investors. Jake here. In this video, we're going to talk about the Federal Reserve because on Wednesday of this week they met and they made several important announcements. The first one being is that they're going to speed up the process of tapering by about 3 months. This is where the Fed buys US Treasuries in order to artificially lower their yield. The second one is the Fed is projecting, as of right now, 3 rate hike increases for 2022. This is the federal funds interest rate, the rate at which commercial banks borrow money from the Fed. Now, before we get too far into this video, guys, I just want to give a disclaimer and say that I am not a conspiracy theorist on the Fed. I believe the Federal Reserve is actually acting in the nation's best interest, but Jerome Powell is a politician. He might not be elected, he's appointed, but when he speaks to the public, he can't always tell the entire truth. He can't give a full explanation for why the Fed is doing what it's doing. If you guys just personally do not like the Fed, I highly recommend you read this book, The House of Morgan by Ron Chernow, and you can read about what the financial markets and the world of banking was like before the Fed. It was not better, 100% guys. The 1800s was a nightmare. So once again, I think the Fed is acting in our best interest, but they're just not being honest about what they've been doing the last 2 years. So to explain what the Federal Reserve has been doing, it's important to understand their 2 mandates. The Federal Reserve Charter explicitly says what their objective is. The first one is price stability. They're supposed to control inflation and keep it between 1 and 2% a year. Inflation between 1 and 2% is the mark of a good economy. You don't want deflation because if you have $100 today and that cash is worth $105 next year, you have no incentive to spend it. And you don't want too much inflation because this diminishes your wages, it diminishes the purchasing power of your money. The second mandate of the Fed is full employment of the workforce. This is, there's lots of different ways you can measure this, but basically they want to make sure that everybody who wants to work, who wants to find a job, can do so. You definitely don't want 20% unemployment like we had in the Great Depression. So now let's cover what is not the Federal Reserve's job. And it is not the Federal Reserve's job to guarantee that the stock market only goes up. Corrections in the stock market are healthy, they are normal for capital markets, they should be occurring every so often. Additionally, it is not the Federal Reserve's job to prevent recessions. Once again, recessions being a contraction of the GDP of an economy, they're healthy and they're normal and they should occur every so often. As long as inflation is low and unemployment is low as well, the Federal Reserve is doing its job. And it can only do this by one of 2 ways right now. The first one is the federal funds effective rate. Here is where the rate has been the last 15 years, and you can see it was going up through 2006. It reached an interest rate of 5.25, and then as we hit the 2008-2009 recession, it went down to 0%. And it stayed there until 2016 when it started going up again. The other method they have is basically quantitative easing, where they start buying mortgage-backed securities and they start buying US Treasuries, and recently, as of last year, they started buying corporate bonds. So the Federal Reserve can just apparate money out of nothing and then start buying real securities. And this is what they did starting in 2008. So this was the 2008-2009 recession. Their balance sheet of what they were holding totaled $4.5 trillion. It then started going down, and then obviously it's shot up to a ridiculous number now because of the global pandemic. So it's the Federal Reserve's job to monitor 2 things. The first one being unemployment, and wow, it went up to over 8% in 2020. That's very concerning. The second one is inflation, and inflation was between 1 and 2% consistently up until this year. When you look at recent news articles, wholesale prices measures rose 9.6% year over year. That's the fastest pace on record. So unemployment right now is pretty decent and inflation is very high. So what exactly has the Fed been doing? So what I'm arguing for you in this video is that this is what the Federal Reserve wanted all along, secretly. Secretly, they wanted high inflation. They wanted to get it close to 10% year over year. We'll cover why they wanted this, but first you need to understand what was going on in the markets in 2018. So in 2018, we'll just look at the S&P. Its year performance was something bad. The market was basically flat for 2018. It was down, the S&P was down about 5%. So the stock market wasn't going up, and investors were not happy with the Fed. The reason why is because the Federal Reserve was raising interest rates from 2016 through 2018. Through January, it got as high as 2.4%. And you'll notice that the amount of assets they have on the books were starting to roll off, and they were basically dumping their securities on the markets, thus attracting higher yields. So they were lowering how much they had on the books. And then it reversed. So look at this. When we look at how much the Fed had on their books, it reached a low of 3.7 trillion, and then it started going up. It started going up in late 2019. It started going up before the pandemic hit. That's kind of strange. Same thing with interest rates, guys. It hit a high of 2.38. The Fed then lowered interest rates, and it got to 1.55 by November of 2019. This was 3 months before the pandemic hit and everything shut down. So when the pandemic hit, the Fed was able to use it as an excuse to do what it already wanted to do. So it wanted to lower interest rates farther. It wanted to add assets to its books. So when the pandemic hit in February or March of 2020, it had full permission without apology to just go crazy, basically. So why would they do this? Why would they want to do this? And first, we're going to explain why they weren't doing it. So let's go back to some articles in 2019. If you weren't paying attention to the markets in 2019, once again, investors were frustrated that the S&P for an entire year was down 5%. So the market was flat as the Fed was rolling off securities on their books and raising interest rates. So here's an article from January 2019. The Fed may be moving closer to ending its rally-killing balance sheet reduction. Interesting. We'll now go to March of 2019. Fed gives the market what it wanted. It's ending its balance sheet reduction in September. So in March, they said, okay, in 5 months, we're going to stop unloading our bonds onto the market, thus increasing the yields they offer, thus basically stopping the market from going up. And then here we are in June of 2019. Trump on demoting Fed Chair Jerome Powell day before rate decision. Let's see what he does. Trump was the reason why this was getting in the headlines, but he was attacking Jerome Powell all the time in 2019 because he wanted easier money. He wanted to say that he was the cause of the stock market going up huge, and Trump was running for re-election in 2020, and the fact that the stock market saw no gains in 2018, this was a political ploy by him. He wanted easier money so the stock market would overinflate just prior to his election. So Powell on Trump, the law is clear that I have a 4-year term and I fully intend to serve it. This is June 2019. Trump tweets, who is our bigger enemy, Fed Chairman Jerome Powell or Chinese President Xi Jinping? This is how dumb politics were in 2019, guys. So once again, Trump daily is tweeting and attacking Jerome Powell saying, give us easier money, lower the rates, stop unloading bonds. But that's not the Federal Reserve's job. If unemployment was low in 2018, 3.9%, and inflation was between 1% and 2%, why the heck is the Fed not tightening? It's their job to raise interest rates and stop quantitative easing so that when they actually do need to do it, they have something they can do. Here is Trump in September of 2019. Trump says Powell and the Fed fail again. No guts, no sense, no vision. So the president's comments follow the Fed's vote to cut interest rates by a quarter point to 1.75. So Jerome Powell's doing what Trump wants. He's cutting the federal interest rates. He's stopping the roll off of the balance sheet. And Trump still isn't happy. He wants easier, cheaper money. Trump rails against Jerome Powell a day after the Fed cuts the rates for a third time this year. This is October 2019. Trump rails on Fed, notes other countries have negative rates. Give me some of that money. So this is November of 2019. Once again, this is a year out from the 2020 election. He doesn't care about, long-term inflation or whatever. He wants the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates, continue quantitative easing, pump up the stock market, pump up the real estate market, have everything look fantastic right before the election. Little did he know, this is 3 months prior to COVID-19 and the pandemic hitting everybody. So here we are, November 2019, Trump and Jerome Powell meet on economy, but Fed says decisions will remain non-political. So the question you have to ask yourself is, was Jerome Powell, the Federal Reserve Chair, actually doing what Trump wanted? Was he lowering interest rates and reversing quantitative easing in order to appease Trump prior to the election, or did he have another ulterior motive? Was he going outside the Fed's mandate of full employment and low inflation? Were there other things going on with the nation that Jerome Powell said, actually, this is a good thing. In the short term, we might want higher inflation in order to combat certain problems. And the first and most obvious reason is the spiraling U.S. national debt, currently at $29 trillion. Just think about it, guys. If you have debt and inflation is 10% a year, then in 1 year, the debt you owe is worth 10% less. So Jerome Powell, by causing 10% inflation, basically just reduced the value of the national debt by $2.9 trillion. That's pretty impressive. Additionally, look at our 3 biggest budget items: Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and the defense budget, $718 billion. If members of the government and service members are not getting a 10% pay increase this year, then basically they're getting a pay cut. So how much this is worth, how much this is costing the taxpayer, basically went down by 10%. Now, we'll come back to Medicare and Social Security in a second. Here's another potential reason, national student loan. I don't think the Fed cares about student loan debt, but this is definitely a benefit as well. If you have student loan debt, it's currently $1.7 trillion. Congrats, it's now worth 10% less as wages have increased because inflation is high. I'm going to show you a crazy picture, guys. I took this picture outside the Walmart in Minot, North Dakota yesterday. Now hiring up to $18.50 an hour plus benefits from Walmart. Oh my God, guys. Sam Walton must be rolling over in his grave. So just think about it. If you were making $12 an hour, at Walmart 6 or 7 years ago, your wages have gone up by 50%. How much easier is it for you now to pay back your student loans? Your student loans are worth less, you're making more. You can argue this is a good thing. The second one is Social Security. You see all these scary articles all the time about when is Social Security set to run out. Well, how is Social Security and Medicare paid for? And they're paid for with FICA taxes. So this is how much it's costing us for Social Security and Medicare. But these programs are paid for with basically W-2 income, people who work a job, not investments. If you're investing in the stock market, you're not paying into Social Security or Medicare. So if wages have gone up by 50%, then the people paying into Social Security and Medicare have gone up 50%. And as long as the benefits being paid out don't increase by more than what inflation is, and the cost for Medicare and Medicaid doesn't go up by more than what inflation is, then we're actually managing and controlling these costs much better. Once again, guys, just an idea. The next possible reason why the Federal Reserve might want high inflation is property values. Real estate prices have skyrocketed. And if you own a home, this makes you very happy, very excited that your home has appreciated in value, but your property taxes are going to go up. For state and local governments to support schools, to support police officers, firefighters, all that stuff, they need tax revenue from property values. So by giving, the real estate market a huge boost, this is really good for state and local governments. Once again, another positive to high inflation. The other one is that the baby boomers are currently retiring or set to retire. So by causing asset inflation in the stock market, you're basically giving them all a golden parachute if they're smart enough to cash out. The current total balance in retirement accounts, IRAs, 401ks, etc., is $37 trillion. And you'll notice it's been going up pretty dramatically because the stock market has been going up dramatically. If you're 65 or 70 years old and you've ridden up the stock market, 50% in the last 3 years, you should really maybe transfer some of that to bonds and take some profits if you're doing pretty well in your 401k. So all of the theories that I've given you potentially why the Fed might want high inflation are interesting, but I honestly think this is probably their primary reason. And this is interest payments on the national debt. At a projected cost of $300 billion this fiscal year, interest payments are a significant part of the federal budget. But how much are we paying, guys? Let's scroll down. And in 2019, this is interest on our national debt. We, the taxpayers, paid $375 billion. In 2020, it went down to $345 billion. In 2021, it's projected to be 303. In 2022, it's projected to be 285. So how is it possible that the national debt is skyrocketing by trillions every year as we continue to run a deficit? And yet, the interest we're paying on our debt is going down year to year. And you can explain this by just looking at the yield rate that you can get on US Treasuries. So basically, when the government can't balance its budget, it has to issue US Treasuries to raise money, and they have to offer an incentive for people to basically loan them money. That incentive is the US Treasury yield rate. For the 10-year US Treasury, it's currently 1.42%. So if you want to get 1.42% on your money every year for 10 years, you can buy US Treasuries right now. But look at where this has been over time. Back in 1981, a 10-year US Treasury note was paying 15.8% a year. If you wanted to make 15% on your money every year, basically guaranteed for 10 years, you could have bought Treasury notes in 1981. And over time, this has gone down, and it basically has just flatlined since the 2008-2009 financial crisis. It got as low as 0.72 in 2020. So what is causing this to go down, especially over the last 15 years? And it's the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve has been buying U.S. Treasuries to drive down the yield to basically force investors to go into other asset classes to get a higher return. Investors want to buy U.S. Treasuries. This is a guarantee. This is the most secure investment you can basically make. So for the last, especially 15 years, but specifically the last 2 years, I think the Federal Reserve has been deliberately wanting to buy U.S. Treasuries to drive down this yield to help manage the interest payments on the national debt. If the Federal Reserve wasn't buying U.S. Treasuries at all, then the yield rate would rise, probably dramatically, as we continue spending more and more running a deficit, and this interest payment potentially could spiral out of control. So even though this is not the Federal Reserve's mandate to help the nation manage its basically spending problem, I think that's what they're doing. I think they're looking at the long-term ramifications and problems of not stepping in by not continuing quantitative easing. And once again, this is not the Fed's mandate. Price stability and full employment. And I think they're looking at larger macro trends saying The nation's in trouble if we don't keep basically pumping the money supply. If we don't keep buying U.S. Treasuries to keep the yield rate low, the country in 5-10 years will have much bigger problems. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if the Fed secretly wants to raise interest rates but continue quantitative easing. They probably want to do this. They probably secretly want to raise interest rates, the money that commercial banks can borrow, but they want to keep buying US Treasuries to keep the yield rate low so that we're not paying so much on the national debt. Okay guys, that was just my theory, basically why for the last 12 months, since we've had the vaccine, since we knew the economy was still growing, since basically everybody who wanted to work could work, why the Federal Reserve hasn't been more aggressive on trying to control inflation and speed up the tapering, speed up the rate increases. I definitely think they had a longer game plan here, and they can't come out and say it. I don't think they can be honest about what their long-term concerns were, and they just basically used the pandemic as an excuse to do what they had already started doing in 2019, what they wanted to do anyways. So there's definitely some next-level chess moves going on behind the scenes, and when you watch CNBC or see Jerome Powell speak, he's just a politician. He's just giving the soft answers that will make everyone feel good, but it's not really what the Federal Reserve has been trying to do all along. Okay guys, if you enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up so the algorithm knows it's good. If you have any comments or questions, let me know down below. I love hearing from you guys. Till the next video, take care.